Hello! In my last video about love and philosophy, I gave you a lot of really densely packed information, so I thought I could unpack it and flesh things out a bit more. We were discussing how love is the starting point for knowledge, truth, sovereignty, freedom, and goodness, as expressed in the natural law expressions chart, and how love is defined as the expansion of consciousness. The dark occultists or the social engineers, they do not want you to know this because they want to create an environment of chaos in which they can manipulate and control by generating an environment of fear. And so fear is the opposite of love. And as we see, here's the natural law expressions chart. And I want to make the quick note that a lot of our fears are unconscious. We're not really aware. So if we're living in a lot of drama and have a lot of chaos in our lives, we need to ask the question why and get to the causal factors. And I will give you an a personal story, and that is my last relationship in which led to chaos, and I was wondering why. And it took me some time, but I finally remembered when I had chosen fear over love, and that was when I had recognized that being in that relationship was going to be toxic for me and kind of a destruction of my feminine side. And my ex-partner, when I told him, he was basically like, see ya, I'm a man, go my own way. And I was like, I don't want to be alone. And so I begged him to come back, and that's choosing fear over love. Getting back to our topic, we have a lot to cover, so I'm talking really fast. Krishnamurti discovered that the mind can interfere with reality. And this is why I presented that it's because we need to come from love first to gain truth. And a lot of philosophers and seekers of truth have the misconception that you just start with the mind. And you need to start with love because you need to be fully receptive to the data and not arranging it to fit a contracted fear-based mental construct. And so if we recontextualize Krishnamurti, as he was specifically talking about the negative mind, not the positive mind. He was talking about the conditioned mind, the mind of prejudice, of projecting the past onto the future, and or projecting the past onto the present moment. And he wanted to free us from religion, from ideology, from identification, and all dogmatic systems of thought. Obviously, if this is taken too far, this can lead us into anti-intellectualism, because we do need the mind to know this. Krishnamurti said that the mind is to be used in the technical fields of science, but not in gaining truth, and he was false in saying that. Aristotle, one of our greatest first philosophers, he or not really first, but it was just the main one in the Greek history. He considered philosophy to be a technical science, and to be the first science in which all other sciences are built. So yeah, everyone needs to understand metaphysics. Every scientist needs to know metaphysics. Now, my thoughts on technicality is that philosophy doesn't have to be that technical. We can understand the basics enough to live in a good and moral society, and that's why I love Mark Passiev's work, because he goes into the right level of detail with models such as things like this that anyone can understand. So we want to be egalitarianism and not elitist about philosophy. Plato was very elitist and thought that the philosopher kings should rule, but any real philosopher knows that you're not supposed to rule other people because that's immoral. Now, I like being as technical as necessary in order to destroy the sophists. And I also like to be at the cutting edge because that's an expression of my own evolutionary spirit, but I really hope that my content can range the span from beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels of philosophy. We shouldn't throw out good metaphysics. We should throw out bad metaphysics. And I have illustrated what that is. Unfortunately, my printer ran out of black ink. And don't worry, I'm going to do high-tech, more sophisticated presentations in the future. I'm just practicing my rhetoric right now, but I can read this to you. So living philosophy in the white side is metaphysics, epistemology, morality, natural law, love, knowledge, freedom, anarchy, sovereignty, goodness, order, methodology, trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, understanding, wisdom, right action, justice, virtue, reason, common sense, eternal beauty, truth, beauty, evolution, higher non-dual consciousness, veganism, the only ism that's allowed in the white side because it's not harming. It's like, that's moral, right? And holistic intelligence. And so on the dead side, we have the artificial dead constructs of the mind that Krishnamurti is pointing out, which we need to eliminate, as the beginning part of freedom, not the end though. And the dead philosophy is solipsism, moral relativism, statism, man's law, carnism, dogma, irrationalism, empiricism, rationalism, contradiction, nihilism, elitism, existentialism, modernism, phenomenology, postmodernism, structuralism, semantics, subjectivism, collectivism, narcissism, utilitarianism, pragmatism, hedonism, feminism, multiculturalism, Marxism, absolutism, atheism, liberalism, conservatism, socialism, Darwinism, nominalism, nationalism, romanticism, spiritualism, New Age, idealism, Satanism, Luciferianism, Scientology, Machiavellianism, skepticism, quantum mechanics, relativity, cultural relativism, transhumanism, positivism, materialism, absurdism, behaviorism, scientism, integralism, ignorance, evil, chaos, capitalism, slavery, intellectualism, communism, fascism, patriotism. Do you see how exhausting evil is? Chaos! I'm going to read a quick passage from Krishnamurti's Total Freedom. Very few of us listen directly to what is being said. We always translate or interpret it according to our particular point of view, whether Hindu, Muslim, or communist. We have formulations, opinions, judgments, beliefs through which we listen, so we are never really listening at all. We are only listening in terms of our own particular prejudices, conclusions, or experiences. We are always interpreting what we hear, and obviously that does not bring about understanding. What brings about understanding surely is to listen without any anchorage, without any definite conclusion, so that you and I can think out the problem together, whatever the problem may be. Now we have to really contextualize this properly, and what helps is to know the trivium. And with the trivium, we have grammar, which is input of data, gathering the data, logic, analyzing the data, and rhetoric, which is sharing the knowledge that you've acquired or taking some type of right, good moral action or action that fulfills your unique creative purpose. What Krishnamurti is really saying is don't project your false mental constructs onto the reality as you're receiving it. Just receive the information with as whole of an attention as you can, and that's why I say that's coming from love. This is something that I have written, and it relates to phenomenology. I feel like Krishnamurti was like an esoteric phenomenologist, whereas Husserl and Bergson were exoteric, academia-driven phenomenologists. And this is a reason why Krishnamurti, I think, had more truth to offer than they did, because Krishnamurti wasn't conditioned by academia. This is what I wrote. Phenomenology is like the grammar of the senses, the data input of perception, from feeling moment to moment. Things first arise in the ambiguous field of awareness and move into clarity through the process of focus, which distinguishes one thing from another, defined by identity. It is important to allow a relaxed flow in that process that does not distort the information through selectivity, exclusivity, rejection, or compulsion, such as jumping to conclusions. To directly perceive reality, we must be in sync with the incoming data flow so that it is not obstructed by mental constructs. Coming from love and not fear is the key so that our consciousness is not fragmented with distortion and bias, and thus available and free to see what is. Otherwise, our perception of reality is interfered with past experiences or present identifications. With love, we expand by gathering new data through a living evolutionary process towards good, in which we reject stagnation and being crystallized and regress by limiting thought forms. When Edmund Husserl emphasized immediate experience over judgment, the positive from that is like, don't judge when you're gathering the data. You gotta just gather the data first. They were essentially talking about the first part in a 3-part series. So we do not want to dismiss logic and rationality from the fact that we do have to analyze information and we should come to conclusions of what things are. To not know what things are is sophistry, anti-philosophy. We should not throw away good first principles such as duality. Duality was a first principle discovered by the natural philosophers. Empedocles saw that there was love and strife. Parmenides saw that there was permanence. Heraclitus saw that there was change. Plato saw that there was the one and the many. So duality is a metaphysical principle. Not only can it be recognized in the mind, in the structure of the mind, it's also a reflex objective reality. So duality is objective. The 3 main objective dualities are true and false, good and evil, right and wrong. Now, if you don't already know that these dualities exist in reality, how the hell are you going to be able to interpret reality? How are you going to be able to identify evil and goodness in your environment? If you can't, it's because you're confused. You're coming from ignorance. This is why first principles are first. We need to know certain things in order to interpret reality correctly, and this is the good mind. And why Kant called metaphysics a priori. It's a priori. I have to know good and evil exists in order to perceive good and evil. And in this way, metaphysics is prior to epistemology. There is a good interpretive structure that matches reality. But Kant, Kant. He was a high-quality intellectual sophist. And so he made a lot of confusion. He was a genius at being confused and really made it look intelligible. And that is what you call false knowledge. And the reason why is because he claimed that the duality of reality, like that being a first principle, and also the first principles of the categories from Aristotle, such as genus, species, substance, attribute, and then the first principles of Plato, such as knowledge and freedom, these transcendental virtues. He wanted to just say that that's of the mind, but this is where he was really dangerous and insidious, is he didn't say that those structures, which he considered to be linguistic structures of the mind, he didn't say that it didn't correspond to objective reality. He was much more clever than that. He said, we cannot know if they correspond to reality. And this is the reason why Ayn Rand calls Immanuel Kant the most evil person in history. If he was just a full-on skeptic, he'd be like Hume, and he'd be like, can I really take this guy seriously? And here's the obvious question. But how do you know you cannot know? And that, my friends, is why we cannot do without first principles, no matter what. Either they're bad first principles or they're good first principles. Sophistry is a trap. It's a dead end. Don't fall for it. To say, I don't know if I can know, is coming from fear. But let's not throw out the good of Kant, because Kant was bringing up some good stuff. As far as our structure of consciousness might not be aligned to reality. And so this is how we differentiate epistemology and metaphysics. Metaphysics is what is. Epistemology is our knowledge of what is. And we might not have knowledge of what is. We might be in ignorance. But we don't want to say that we are forever doomed to ignorance. Jiddu Krishnamurti merely wanted to free us from bad first principles or the bad mental constructs of the mind of ideology and bias. But as we have seen, there is good proper interpretive structures that are necessary to interpret reality accurately. Later, through the history of philosophy in the era of postmodernism, we see that the postmodernists looked at the interpretive structure as not only having these subjective influences, but also having objective and collective influences from our culture. And they in particular looked at the socio-political economic structure, such as Friedrich Nietzsche and Karl Marx, and even they looked at the structure of language as being as causing a filter and bias towards our perception of reality, such as the linguists and even the structuralists like Foucault. They did offer some good. And this is important to see how language can distort our perception of reality when investigating the dark occult and their methods of mind control and manipulation. You give new definitions to words, and you are using a little bit of sorcery and magic to confuse and deceive people. The problem is that postmodernism went too far as to destroy metaphysics, so they really had no ground to stand on. How do you point out that someone has a bias? Like, how do you say that the biases in society are in favor of the wealthy if there's no objective reality to begin with? So that, postmodernism doesn't have a foot to stand on. If everyone's coming from a bias, then your perspective of that person's bias is your own bias, and their perspective of your bias is their bias. Do you see the madness that is postmodern relativism? It's so nauseating. Simply, the three enemies of philosophy: sophistry, moral relativism, and religion. And the two greatest religions are the religion of money and the religion of government. And we need to get rid of that to become free. And we don't have to do any violence. It's all in just becoming awake and seeing the truth. All right, love you.